Well, Dr. Richison, thank you so much for taking the time.
Please.
Grant, all right. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit with us and share some of your story and what God has done in and through your life, your marriage, your ministry. I look forward to learning from you, but also to celebrating with you and give glory to God at the end of the day. As you think back on your time at Grant, it was a significant season of gospel influence and kingdom impact in the rich history of our church. Talk to us about some of those defining moments. So every day I walk into a piece of your legacy, which is our location.
Yes.
So for a long time, Grant was on Colony Street,
Yes.
right? And then under your leadership, they made the massive move to go out into the middle of a field at the time.
Yes.
And what I see now wasn't there then. These communities that have built up, Linden Woods around us. Right. So that's one example, but just as you think back on your ministry at Grant and what God did through your leadership, I'm very curious to hear your perspective on these decisions that just started as a thought in your mind and that led to a conversation with a team that led to what I walked into.
We hired a man by the name of Ray Larson, which was a tremendous blessing.
Yes.
This man was a member of the church. He had gone to, at that time, Winnipeg Bible College, and he and his wife were looking for a ministry. And I saw him, I saw his passion, and he said, "Ray, would you mind coming on and becoming our, quote, ministries coordinator?" The ministries coordinator meant everything I wasn't doing, you know. And, and
other duties as assigned.
Yeah, right. And he was such a personality. People loved him. Yeah. And he was really good at organization and that sort of thing. The church kept growing. And then we ran out of parking space. And so now people are parking blocks away in order to get to the church. Then the church kept growing, and we ran out of Sunday school rooms. So we asked the University of Winnipeg, a half mile or a mile away or something like that, to allow us to use their facilities for Sunday school.
Right.
So now we're busing people over there, and people are walking, and the church is growing.
And it's so exciting to hear about the building momentum, what God is doing, what the Holy Spirit is doing, and then just people are walking in the winter blocks to get to worship. That's exciting. You know, God is doing something. Yes. But you hit that tipping point of maybe we need to find another location. So talk to me about that moment for you, and then from there, how you ended up leading the church to relocate.
We had already gone into double services, and Ray at this time was so happy with this because he was having trouble recruiting people because they would miss church. Right. You know, if they did junior church, then they would miss church. Yeah. And so now we have two services. They could attend one church and serve in the other hour. So this really began to develop the growth and the dynamic. So then Ken Harris, if it weren't for him, I don't know if we would have found that land and get it. It was actually a pasture. And the hardest part about building that building was getting the land off the city. The city was very tight about hanging on to that property. But eventually, they allowed us to buy it. I think it was 24 acres or something like that. And so we went out there. Now the church is ready because, I mean, the facilities, the inconvenience and all of that was pushing us out there. Some people, it was a citywide church at this time, and so, the people would come from bus down, and the old location was toward downtown. So now we're going to be moving out toward more of an edge of the city, but it was still a citywide church. And people said, well, how are people going to get there? We said, well, we'll bus you. Don't worry. Go to the old site and we'll come over there. So we did all of that, did all of those things. Then we finally got the land. We didn't want to dedicate the land. And we found a little lean-to there. And what is this lean-to? So we looked inside, and this kid had developed a church in there. He had his Bible and his songs and all of this. And we said, "Oh no, we're gonna destroy this guy's church." My suspicion is that his parents probably didn't want him to be a Christian, and so he was having his own worship service by himself.
He'd already consecrated the ground.
He was already consecrated. So Doug Cook was already on the board at this time. And he began to negotiate with banks and this sort. He was a partner in an accounting firm. Did you know that Doug Cook is a wheeler dealer? Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
Well, did you know that Grant Memorial had 5 physical churches all in 1 year? Doug arranged the financing, but we needed to sell the facility on Colony Street. But there's a Chinese church that really was exploding too, and they needed to move in there. But they said, we would love to buy the property on Colony, but we can't afford it because we don't have anyone to buy our church. Right. So Doug says, "Oh, we'll buy your church if you buy this one." And so then there was another church way out on the edge of town that wanted to buy the church that we just bought. And so Doug says, "Well, I'll tell you what, we'll buy your church if you buy this one." And so we ended up having 5 churches. We finally sold the last church to a lawnmower company on Osborne Street.
Right.
But I mean, as far as I'm concerned, a man like Ray Larson and a fellow like Doug Cook, they were unbelievable value to the advancement of the cause of Christ at Grant Memorial.
And so that was a major turning point in the history of the 125 years. That's one of those game-changing moments, right? Where you move the location. Some other things that you think of when you look back at your time at Grant, and just you had the opportunity and the privilege to lead multiple significant changes.
Right.
So when you think about the incredible outreach of Living Christmas Tree, thousands of people that came to Christ. Many more that were impacted. Heaven only knows, right?
Yeah.
That became something that the whole city knew about. With Linden Christian School, which is now the largest private school in Manitoba. Right? But it started with just an idea.
Right.
Just a handful of students in a corner of a classroom. Yeah. And now we have 1,000 students with over 100 staff. Incredible. When you think of these Linden Home and Linden just the list goes on and on. I am blown away by just these game-changing accomplishments that required visionary, courageous leadership. So talk to us a little bit about some of those other...
you mentioned the Living Christmas Tree. That started in the old building down in Colony Street. It began as kind of a musical, and then even back there was a museum of fine arts right down the street from Colony on Osborne Street. And we asked this musical couple to come and hold a conference in that school, that Museum of Fine Arts. But we said, no one can come unless they bring a non-Christian. And you know what, Pastor? Some of these people have never led anyone to Christ in their lives. And they brought their friends and they accepted Christ. And that became kind of the nucleus for growth and
Yes.
expansion and whatever. And then we started using what eventually became the living Christmas tree, but in the old building under Colony,
Right.
like that too. So why don't you invite your non-Christians
Yeah.
to attend this? But what was happening is that people were beginning to see life-changing
Yes.
in
Yes.
among non-Christians. And so the reason we started Living Christmas Tree, even in its embryonic phase and what it became, it wasn't only the Living Christmas Tree. We held other major events like that throughout the year. Randy Weber, who was another godsend, he put on some of the other productions. It was amazing. They built ice skating rinks on
Yes,
the
I've heard.
platform, and they would lead the coach to Christ, and then I would get up and give people an opportunity to
Yeah.
receive Christ there. One time they built a ski jump or ski slide
Yep.
from the balcony
Yeah.
down, and Randy lost control and almost killed him. But
I've heard rumors of these, and I walk in to Grant as the new pastor after Living Christmas Tree has wrapped up, and we no longer do it. But just the story, people remember that.
Oh yes.
Not just the ice skating rink, not just the ski slope and all the amazing things that this volunteer army was able to accomplish, but the outreach, the
Yes.
impact.
Oh, that's, the reason why we launched Live at 11 was to get our people oriented to evangelism.
Yeah.
That's the hardest thing to do as a pastor.
Mm-hmm.
It's much easier to get people into discipleship and
Yes.
Bible studies and small groups, and even though some small groups are used for evangelism and this sort of thing, but to actually have one of your people go to a non-Christian and say, hey, would you mind coming with me to this event?
Yes.
And the thing about it, these events were not designed to embarrass a non-Christian. Everything in the Living Christmas Tree was designed to attract the non-Christian.
Yeah.
And same thing with Live at 11.
Yeah.
It was, we didn't want anything to get in the way
Right.
of the real message,
Sure.
because there's so much bias by non-Christians
Yes.
in society about what true Christianity is.
Yeah.
We just try to eliminate those things.
Yeah.
And boy, people at Grant, Pastor, they did constant change. We had virtually a culture of change.
Yes.
And when we didn't change something in a very long time, people said, what's wrong? Why are we not changed? Where's something new going on
Yeah, that
here?
is supernatural.
Yeah, but you know what? You know what I attribute much of that to? Was the board.
Yeah.
I could not believe that board. They, over the years, virtually did everything I asked them to do. Not summarily, just do what you want,
Yeah.
Pastor. No. We had board retreats where we analyzed ministry every year, and then we set the vision
Sure.
for what we were going to do the next year. And so, but the board, once they saw it, once they bought into it,
Yeah.
and a board with a mentality of being open to
Sure.
innovation, to risk taking. But about the second or third week, I was at the pulpit and I said, God has not called me to do everything in this church. God has called me to lead the church and to be a pastor, but I'm not going to be doing all this nitty gritty type
Right.
of things, because if I do that, I will keep this church into a small domain and will never be able to break out of it.
Right.
So I said, I'm not going to do ministry. You're going to do ministry, and I'm going to see that it's done. And you know what? They didn't kick me off. When I first started doing Bible exposition at the level it was being done, we had some people say, "We don't like this. You're going to kill this church." It's like all these pastors I spoke to across Canada. Bible exposition doesn't work. Oh, my land, you're wrong. But I did receive a lot of critics in those days. But to their credit, they were open to it and they began to see it. Yeah. They began to see what was happening.
Sure.
And people said, "I have attended church all my life and I have never grown. I have never developed as a Christian like I am right now. And I've never become more firm or confident in what I believe. And when I'm sharing Christ, I feel more confident about it because I know what I believe."
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many people told me that over and over through the early years, which really became the basis for the dynamic that happened in the latter years.
Yeah. It's amazing. I'm so inspired hearing you testify about the church that I now have the privilege of pastoring, of just the incredible things, the breathtaking moments that you got to experience with our church, with the growth that happened that really pushed you out of Colony, out onto Wilkes, the outreach within the city, like just even with these professional athletes and sports teams, with the Jets and with the Bombers, just the gospel influence that just begins to permeate the communities in the city, with the living Christmas tree starting the way it did, and then God just building it to what it became. Where 300 or 400 volunteers, as far as mobilizing that number of volunteers to commit hours and hours, weeks and months of rehearsals, and my goodness, the manpower required behind that.
Yeah, and even outside the living Christmas tree, the whole philosophy was mobilization of people.
Yes.
That's what I meant when I said I'm not going to do ministry. Right. I'm going to see that ministry
Equip
is done.
the saints for the work of ministry.
The saints began to become mobilized, and they began to do ministry. And the beauty about it is because they were growing in the Word so much that they wanted to serve. It was not. I remember one time Ray Larson came to me and he says, "We're having some trouble recruiting." And I said, "Ray, we do not need to provide motivation. If we get people into a Sunday school class and they don't want to teach it and they're doing it out of duty and not because God has graced them and blessed them and worked on their lives." We just had a complete mobilization.
It was
and
a culture.
People were encouraging one another to serve. And we gave staff privileges to lay people that we gave absolutely no salary to, but they wanted to serve. But and so they took it and they ran it. We gave them a budget. We said, the only thing we request, we're not going to tell you how to do this ministry. We give you here's our philosophy of ministry, and you need to know that there are other people that are serving in this church and they're sharing resources, so that please give that consideration. But other than that, run and gun. And so they did. They took the ministry and ran with it.
Run and gun. I like that. So let's switch gears, and because LCS is such a Linden Christian School, is such a incredible ministry now, where it really is a citywide families, students, and it's so, the DNA is so bibliocentric, like the curriculum, everything has to be held to a biblical standard. And what I see now, I have 2 kids in that school, right? And I walk the hallways, but I'm walking through what you helped build. So talk to him about the beginning of that kind of.
That's a story. What we need is a school that we don't want to bore a hole in the top of the kid's head and pour in information. And we want them to be able to think, and to be able to be logical and critique, and be a free thinker, but think on the basis of principle. Now, Phyllis Cook, Doug's wife, was a long-standing teacher. She was also in the attitude about Christian schools, and a lot of others were. And I remember we had some principals. We had a lot of teachers in the congregation at that time, and they were not all that open to it.
Right.
But then we had to contextualize and give them quite a story
Yeah.
about how we need to build a school that you just described,
Right.
that's biblically
Yes.
based, but that allows the student to think
Yes.
like they should. And Phyllis took that school and she put it on the map.
And to be able to walk that hallway and see these students sitting in these classrooms, learning from a Christian worldview,
Yes,
right? And the chapels, I hear them worshiping in there,
yes.
right? And we have well over 1,000 people come through our doors 6 days a week.
Right.
I really appreciate the way you've honored Grant and just your heart. I could tell you still love our church.
Oh, what a church. What a church.